Good day and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management Webinar Series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the Program Manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series, and Lisa Ruggiero of the National Recycling Coalition for providing technical support. Today's webinar will focus on carton recycling, and I'd also like to thank Chris Carr from the Carton Council for helping us out and getting this presentation together. Our presenter today is Jason Pelz, who will introduce in a moment. Following the presentations, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel on your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you are experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. And please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Jason Pelz is Vice President of Environment for Tetra Pak, Inc., and is responsible for designing and executing the company's recycling strategy throughout the United States. Specifically, Pelz works with Tetra Pak's brand owners, local municipalities and communities, and other third parties, such as recyclers and paper mills, to increase the availability of carton recycling nationwide. Pelz joined the company in 2002 from Waste Management Recycle America, where he served as Director for Global Export Sales and directed the global export strategy for Waste Management's secondary fiber and waste plastics. Prior to Waste Management, he was Senior Account Manager for the Pelz Group, a privately owned paper recycling company, which was acquired by Waste Management. He's an expert in the recycling and paper mill industry, including export markets. Pelz attended the University of California at Los Angeles and earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Spanish. He currently resides in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with his wife and 4 children. And now I'm going to hand the program over to Jason. Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate that. You can still hear me, I hope?
Yeah, you're good.
Good. Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm just going to take you through what we think is a great story about carton recycling. We at Carton Council and the founding companies are all very proud of this. So I'll take you through and then hopefully can answer your questions at the end. So just as an overview, we'll do a little background and history. Following that, we'll talk about markets. Then we'll talk about the supply chain. And then lastly, we'll talk about the successes to date and what our next steps are as part of Carton Council. So cartons, pretty broad term, but what we're talking about is liquid packaging cartons and for food and beverage. But cartons are lightweight, sustainable packages for both refrigerated and shelf-stable food and beverage products. And I'll go into a little bit further, but in the market in the U.S., we get both based on what the 2 supply chains are. With regards to the Carton Council, we 5 companies a few years ago realized that we had an issue with getting our products recycled. So we decided to create a group called the Carton Council, really with one main focus, where we 5 competitors could sit down and focus on one strategic initiative, which was a problem, which was how do we get our cartons recycled and how do we get them out of the landfill. So that was where the creation of the Carton Council came back in 2009. What our goals are, obviously we want to increase household access to carton recycling. We want to increase the recovery to carton recycling. And really we're proud to say that if you look at this chart, working with drop-off communities, with curbside collection, with schools, with MRFs and institutions and the end market, in under 5 years, we've been able to bring carton recycling to more than half of all U.S. households across the country. So again, a major step. The reason, obviously, with more access is to us, that brings more visibility. Our goal is to have a logo on the cartons that simply shows that they are recyclable, which they are. We view that as being important because for consumers, that's a key area where people get information as to what they should be doing with material, whether it should go in the garbage bin or in the recycling bin. And at the present point, based on FTC regulations, what we have is a qualified logo, which talks about cartons being recyclable, but then specifies that it's only where facilities exist. We also have, as you'll see, the website on there, which then further gives the people the chance to go to that website to find out if their community has recycling for cartons. And if they don't, it gives them a chance to let us know so we can work with the community, or it gives them a chance to approach their communities directly. But we are working very much with us companies are working very much with our customers to make sure that we are making sure that they put the proper logo on the carton to be able to get that message out to the public. And then again, if you take it a step further, the visibility also means more recovery. And as I said, to us, with no message, it really left a question. With the qualified message, it helps, but what we're really shooting for is the purely recyclable message, and that occurs when we cross the 60% threshold nationwide. And again, we view this as a multi-step process. We needed to build access because we didn't have access to the system, and the only way to then build a recycling rate was to have access to get them into the system. So we view this as the better visibility will drive for more recovery as we go forward once we cross that 60% access threshold. So why cartons and why recycling? Number one, cartons are sustainable. In fact, they're one of the most sustainable packages for food and beverages. Cartons are made mainly of paper, which is a renewable resource. For all of us companies, the paper comes from well-managed forests, which is obviously important to all of us. Cartons are lightweight, very compact. The product to package ratio is also very positive for cartons. And the overall life cycle footprint for cartons is also very, very good. But the third important thing that we're discussing right now is that they are recyclable. So we want to make sure that we've got all three of those in there and working correctly to really show the overall sustainability of the carton. So I mentioned to you earlier about the two different types of cartons, and this is something that it's good because it gives a little bit of a diagram to explain how the cartons differ. And a traditional gable top carton, which many of us in the U.S. have grown up with, is, it's a gable top carton that you buy in a chilled format. You keep it in a chilled format. There's that, which is the predominant amount of cartons that you find in the U.S. The other type of carton here is the shelf-stable aseptic carton. The big difference with this carton is the presence of an aluminum layer in it, which adds, for shelf-stable, it protects against light, it protects against oxygen, and what it allows for is for the product to be packaged, stored in a dry environment, not a chilled environment. It can be kept in that non-chilled environment until opened. So really it becomes an extended life product. But together, because there's such similarities with the fiber and with the residue, we viewed it as having cartons being recycled, not aseptic or gable top, but both, as really making up the pack. And I think it's key to also note that little blurb at the bottom, they're not wax coated. Cartons haven't been wax coated for many, many years. It's a simple mistake people make, but again, it's a polyethylene layer on it. And then in the case of aseptic, there's a layer of aluminum sandwiched in between two of the layers. But beyond that, there is no wax at all in cartons. We're a little bit behind in the U.S. In most of the world, carton recycling has been going on for a very long time, and there's a lot of places that are recycling cartons. However, in the U.S., there has been carton recycling going on for at least 2 decades. And as I had said earlier, the access to carton recycling has grown here in the U.S. to now include over half of households. So what we do as Carton Council to achieve our goals. Basically, the idea, when this was figured out originally, the idea was to look at the overall supply chain, from collection, sorting, and the market. And the idea in the end is to build carton recovery. So when you look at the material flow, you know, as many of you are aware, it starts at the household, it goes into the sorting facility, and then to the market. But when we looked at the strategy, we actually felt that it was important to start first at the market level and kind of work backwards, because we felt that having good markets and markets that needed cartons would help draw the pull. Then obviously working with the sorters, because you have to make sure that you can get the cartons into a form that the markets could use, and then finally going backwards to collection and outreach to make sure that the chain gets filled. So we work backwards from the end markets. The idea was to, as I said, build sustainable markets to build the demand, then create a sustainable infrastructure and build the pipeline. And then finally, and probably most important, was to develop awareness and participation, again, to fill that pipeline. So if you kind of look at it, you know, as a circle, really, everything is we like to refer to it as a chain. And truthfully, if one piece of the chain gets broken, it doesn't work. So to us, you know, working backwards, it was still critical to make sure that each link was successful. So in the case of building sustainable markets and building the demand, you know, where did we start? Well, we knew there were some issues. Cartons are a small volume. They're not a tremendous volume in the waste stream. We figure it's somewhere between 0.5% to 2% of incoming single stream in successful programs. But there's value to the cartons. Secondly, you know, if you look at the total tons, 500,000 tons a year based on EPA estimates, you know, if you spread that out, you're, again, not looking at a tremendous commodity. But again, as I said, there's value to each of the components. In 2008, when this started, there was only one active mill in North America handling cartons, which obviously was a hurdle to overcome. And then again, the components of cartons all have potential value. You know, the poly and the polyaluminum residual can also be recycled. And what you'll hear people from Carton Council talk about, and I can speak personally when you talk about the member companies, we're not out just pushing for the recycling of the fiber. Clearly, because that's the highest percentage, we want to make sure it gets recycled. But there is a value to each component. And what we're trying to do is develop a chain that takes all into consideration, because that added value makes the whole chain more valuable. When you look at the markets, you know, what we looked at working with was container board and tissue. You know, we kind of saw those as two opportune markets to focus, to grow the consumption. You know, in the case of the U.S., tissue has really probably been the primary focus. One, it's a very good business from a paper making standpoint. Two, the type of fiber they're looking for, cartons can really be a benefit when going into the tissue business because of that fiber yield. So this is sort of where it started, was we kind of identified where it made the most sense. It's a long fiber product, which makes, again, more sense when you're talking about packaging and when you're talking about tissue. So what we did was worked on end markets. And as you'll see from this slide, what we've really looked at is kind of a portfolio. We are growing consumption within the U.S., but we're also working with and trying to grow consumption outside of the U.S. as well. Again, mainly because from an earlier slide, as I had mentioned, you have a large amount of consumption of cartons happening outside of the country because they got an earlier start. So we have 4 mills in the U.S. that regularly use cartons. We have good demand coming out of Mexico, and then you have export. And this really has helped drive what I talked about earlier about developing sustainable markets. We're not done, though. I'd like to see a whole lot more dots in the United States. We think that there are opportunities, and we get presented with opportunities and continue to work to develop those. And with the existing folks, we also continue to develop and work on new opportunities. To get a little bit further into the export, Korea has been a major consumer of cartons coming out of the U.S. and actually the U.S. and Canada. They view poly-coated as a very good resource for their tissue industry, and therefore have been, as I said, a very strong consumer for years. In the case of Thailand, the mill has been a little bit less consistent, but again has been a good buyer. but this just gives a little bit of an idea of where some of that export is going to. In addition to this, the export opportunities also continue to grow for material coming out of the U.S. when it comes to cartons, as other countries who have the ability to run poly-coated products continue to see and identify sources, which again, as I said earlier, creates that sustainable and strong end market pull, which we want to see for all commodities. So if you ask what's moving, this is the commodity. This is what we have been promoting all along, and this is grade 52, which is post-consumer cartons. As you'll see from these bales, this is material out of a facility that sorts cartons. You're going to have gable tops. You're going to have aseptics, predominantly gable tops because that's predominance of the market. But this is the commodity that we're promoting. This is the commodity that the mills we work with are interested in purchasing and can get the best yield from in the value chain. In April 2011, grade 52 was officially recognized by the recycling industry, which gave it the spec of grade 52. I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but any of you who've read the ISRI specs for other commodities, it's a clear spec. This designation obviously was important because recognizing this commodity meant that this was a viable commodity for the business. So again, when we are out there promoting and pushing, this is what we're promoting and pushing because we believe that this is the best grade there is to get the most value out of the cartons. When you look at some of the opportunities for the grade, as we said, tissue and toweling products is a big one. The Koreans have been a big buyer. Some of the folks in North America have also been interested in it and using it for tissue. What we look at is it could be a mixture of post-consumer cartons. It could be pre-consumer cartons that could come from some of our customers. It could also be from some of the converting factories we have. But this also, where we see cartons as having an interesting niche, is it can be a substitute grade for some of the grades listed below when it comes to tissue. And in fact, even in the de-ink pulp situation, it again can become a substitute. De-ink pulp, I will say this, in the case of de-ink pulp, that's been a very good home for cartons. That fiber, once it's pulped at the de-ink pulp facilities, actually gets made into a number of different things. It could get made into tissue. It could get made into printing and writing paper. It could also get made into white top liner. So again, there is further benefits to cartons from a fiber standpoint beyond just the tissue markets. And then finally, you have this, I would call this a little bit more non-traditional technology, but this is a whole carton recycling option, which really takes the entire carton and can put it into a replacement for OSB board. So wall board or sheathing, ceiling tiles, but this takes the strength of the fiber along with the poly and the polyaluminum, and they can be bound together to create building products for the industry. So these are some of the great opportunities that we see when you look at grade 52 as a whole. And again, some of them are more traditional, and the final one, it's new, not traditional, and we believe that that's a growing opportunity for cartons. From a pricing standpoint, cartons generally in the U.S. follow sorted office paper pricing, and really it varies, but that's what it's kind of been pegged to from a standpoint of, as I said earlier, it's a good substitute for those mills that can handle the poly and be able to depoly. It's a good substitute for potentially sorted office pack. When it comes to export, similar situation. Again, it's going to mills that look for that good, strong white fiber. But when it comes to pricing for export, as many of you are probably aware, it depends on container weights, depends on location, but the demand overall between the two is very good. This is really a clarification slide, and I put this here because I think it's important for people to understand we're not a broker. What we are is a matchmaker. What Carton Council does and has done is we work with all the different parts of the value chain, and then we connect the people. So we do not buy and sell loads, but what we do is put brokers or the direct mill in contact with the generator. Or from the opposite side, we put the sorting facility in contact with a broker or the end market. That's where we view us having the best and most valuable role in creating this value chain when it comes to the movement of products. So again, Carton Council is not taking a position on material, on pricing, or any of that. What it is doing is putting the two necessary parties together to make sure that there is movement. So to talk about some of the key measures of carton recovery success, when you look at yield, yield is a percentage of incoming tons that are recovered and manufactured into a new product. And where cartons can provide a very good yield, there's about 75% fiber in cartons on average. Free of ink, high quality, long virgin fiber. Mills are able to recover up to 100% of the fiber. Now, not all of them will. They'll recover a large portion of it. But what's also, I think, very important to note about cartons is you have this fraction of the poly and polyaluminum that has the potential to be collected. If you go to other parts of the world, that is actually looked upon even more highly valued than the fiber is, because people see tons of opportunities when it comes to the poly and polyaluminum. So why I say this is because what we have here is the potential for a commodity that could almost be 100% recovered. I realize that that's not really possible, but almost possible if you consider the fact that the majority of the fiber can be recovered, and then if the poly and polyaluminum could be recovered, we have a product that really, from a recovery standpoint, could be very good. When you take a look at the hierarchy, what we kind of have gone through is looked at it from highest yield to what we deem unacceptable. Obviously we want the cartons sorted into their own grade, because with that we believe there's an opportunity for the highest yield. Whole carton recycling, which I talked about earlier, could obviously be a very high yield in the sense that the entire carton gets recycled. But if you do have the ability to have the positive sort where the cartons are able to go to a mill that can handle the poly, you've got the chance to get the vast majority of the fiber out of the carton, plus the ability to take the poly and polyaluminum and send them on for further recycling. As you go down the chain, you can see subtle differences. In the high yield one, you're at a situation where maybe the poly and polyaluminum is not being recovered for further recycling, but it could be recovered for energy, which is still, we view, better than going into the landfill. We would prefer cartons not to go into mixed paper, but we do realize that some do in situations, and that is how certain programs have been set up in the past. Again, we don't see that as being the best option because we don't believe there's the full amount of recovery possible. But again, it's acceptable and hopefully a step towards a better option above. And finally, as I said earlier in our mission, we are not interested in cartons going into the disposal stream. We believe that there's a value to them, and going into the garbage really does nothing but throw more stuff in a landfill that doesn't need to be there, especially when it's something that has value. So when you talk about end products, I mentioned earlier, you have printing and writing paper, tissue. When you look at whole carton products, this would be an example of what potentially some of this, the press board or the wall board replacement that would come out, or the sheathing board that could come from a whole carton. And then finally, from a polyaluminum standpoint, those skids are made from polyaluminum residue. And that's happening in some other parts of the world, and we're looking at those options here. But it just shows that there's a wide variety of options for where all the components of cartons can go into as a final product. So here's some pictures from one of the mills, Fox River Fiber in Wisconsin, that does use cartons. This is just a quick glance, but you have the bale. It goes into a traditional pulping system. Then the pulp comes out in bales. I mean, it's again, I'm not going to say that every mill can do it, but those who can handle the poly and depoly, what they come up with is a very fine result, which, as you see on the right side of this slide, is a very nice high-value pulp. So when we talk about building the pipeline, and working on the structure, you kind of take a look at the impacts on the volume. And, we start out with the residents' behavior. And these are all things that we continue to work on and look at and try and identify fixes for. But, number one, to me, it starts at the curb. If the resident puts it in the wrong bin, you're done. It's already over before it started. So again, we want to make sure we understand residents' behavior to make sure that it gets put into the right bin, so at least it has a chance to go through the remaining part of the process. In the collection piece, again, if it is set out and put at collection, could there be times where it doesn't end up in the truck? Is there a reason why that would happen? So again, these are other things that we're taking a look at which could have impacts on volume. In the case of processing, I talked a little bit earlier, we want the product sorted into its own commodity. So if the material doesn't end up in the designated bunker for cartons, what happens? Why didn't it do that? And what can we do to help the MRFs be able to make sure that the cartons make it to where they need to go? And then finally, with the end market, again, this is no different than any recyclable. We want to make sure that the right commodity is sent. So when we talk about grade 52, which I mentioned earlier, clearly a grade less than 52 is going to be cause for potential rejection, which hurts the mill, it hurts the generator, but it also hurts what we're trying to do for cartons, because again, the goal is to make the proper quality of a commodity in order to get the right value, so everybody wins. So what we first do is, on the sorting side, we work with facilities, first of all, to agree to take cartons, and then furthermore, agree to report the data to us, talking about household access. It can talk about the amount of volumes that they ship out of the material. The other thing that we also really promote, as I said earlier, is the positive sortation of cartons at facilities. So we've worked with some facilities on capital grants when it comes to carton recycling. There's some criteria that we have to take into effect, but sometimes it can simply be providing people with just a resource with some experience to talk about opportunities and where they can sort by making small changes within the facility. As with anything, there is no one silver bullet solution to sorting cartons. When I first got into this, everybody talked about optical sorters. I think optical sorters are a great option, but they're not the only option. We've seen successful things done with optical sorting. We've seen some successful things done with a combination of optical and some other sorting. We've seen vacuum sorting with this, which is an assisted manual sort, and we've seen simply manual sort. Really what I'm getting at here, and it goes into the second comment, no one solution is good for every MRF, and that really is going to require the MRF to have a lot of input. And what we've trained our folks and what we ourselves know is the person who knows the MRF best is typically the person who runs the MRF. So while we have resources and we can give guidance, it really becomes a situation where the person who understands their MRF the best, the MRF operator, is going to be key to any decision. But again, there is no one right decision. I've seen many different types of decisions, and they've all been successful. And I've seen some that haven't been so successful. And so again, it's not a there's no one, as I said earlier, silver bullet solution to how this is going to work. But we do have good relationships with the equipment folks, as we assume every MRF does as well, so we can potentially give some guidance or connect with the right people. We do have information, obviously, on the markets. And then, when it comes to equipment grants as to access gains, it's a process we do, and it's a one-on-one basis, and each MRF stands on its own, is how we look at things. The other assistance, again, as I mentioned earlier, is matchmaking with the broker network, which can be putting you in contact with people who can move partial loads, move combination loads. There's also tons of promotional material that we provide for people. And then also customer outreach, because clearly that's going to be important. If a MRF is willing to and wanting to add cartons and do it, they're going to want the volume to come through. So we want to make sure that the outreach is there to make sure we drive the volumes through. So when we talk about filling the pipeline, we've been this is to us very important, obviously, as I'm assuming everybody would clearly understand. You got to have the people at the household know that they can put the cartons in the right bin. If they don't do it, as I said earlier, it's dead on arrival. So really, what we do a lot of, and we've got a great staff and great resources, is we notify the users of the facility that the cartons are accepted. So that's either collectors, third-party haulers, the communities, the residents. And there are numbers of different ways, which we'll go into a little bit further on how we do it. But the idea is to really let people know that this is now acceptable in their neck of the woods, and therefore start putting the cartons not in your garbage bin, but into the recycling bin. As an outcome standpoint, obviously, you know, the increased visibility of carton recycling is going to help, and mainly it's going to drive carton volumes to facilities, which is what we want to see. We want to see, as long as investments are going to be made to at a MRF to handle cartons, we want to see as many through as possible, because obviously that makes it more cost effective and efficient. So we have the ability to help. You know, we have a series of tools that can help with promotion and education around carton recycling. You can see on the right, you know, some of the FAQs we have, some of the mailers that we can do. But again, you know, we have toolkits with templates. We have many grants that we can work with regarding outreach. We also have the ability to do grants on large metropolitan campaigns. Basically, when we created this, we realized that no community, just the same as I said earlier about the MRFs, no MRF's going to be the same, no community is going to be the same. So we realized that what made sense for a place like Los Angeles didn't necessarily make sense for a place like Eagle River, Wisconsin. So to me, I think, you know, we've done a very good job in developing these toolkits, and again, as I said, I will reiterate it, we've got real good resources and people who can help, who've been through enough of these now that can really help disseminate the message correctly based on the community. We also have been very involved in the schools. We think that the schools are great for two reasons. Actually, two is not fair, for a bunch of reasons. Number one, there's a number of cartons in schools. Number two, if you teach the kids at school, hopefully they learn it and they take it with them going into the future, and they maybe impart a little bit of knowledge on their parents as well. But third, the schools really present a great outreach opportunity as well, because a lot of times kids bring stuff home from schools, whether it's a Thursday folder or a Wednesday folder, and that presents other opportunities to really get the message out about cartons. You know, we have a grant program, again, when it comes to schools. We've got a bin grant program that we have as well. There's these very cool bins that we have that look like a gable top carton for a place for the kids to dump their cartons, in addition to the fact that it gives the best practices on the side of it. We have best practice startup guides, and then we have other materials, whether it's posters or other information that we can do to make sure that the proper school program is set up. So to now come to what I think is very impressive is to talk about some of the successes that we've had to date. You know, as I said, Carton Council kicked off the very end of 2008, starting in 2009, and at that time, household access to carton recycling sat at about 18%. So we're pretty proud of the fact that as of the end of last year, we achieved 48%, and right now we are on pace to come pretty close to about 54% for the end of this year. So really, we've made some very strong moves over the last 5 years based on this program that we set up and have been focusing on. So it's a 280% increase in carton recycling access. Back in 2008, you had 24 states, 18%, as I mentioned earlier, of households had carton recycling. Today, we're at 48 states, and as I said, in fact, we're right at about 52.7%, with a number of reporting periods left to get, where we think we're going to get pretty close to that 54. But again, 18 to 54 is a pretty, what I think, impressive jump over the last couple of years. 77 of the largest 100 U.S. cities now have access to carton recycling. We're at 61.5 million households that now have access to carton recycling. And as the final statement says it, more programs are being added across the country, whether it's in schools, new towns, counties. But again, this has got some great momentum behind it, and we look to see that to continue for the foreseeable future. So this, as I said earlier, we talked about kind of a two-step process. And to me, this is a great slide because really it shows our ultimate goal is access is great, but our ultimate goal is to get cartons recycled. And by having access, it gets us into the system to allow us to work on a recycling rate and grow our recycling. So we started out by pushing for access. We worked on end markets, we worked on the sorting facilities, we built the infrastructure, and we've been growing access. But now what we're beginning to look at is how do we then grow recovery? And whether that is re-education, identifying some of those things I mentioned earlier about where the pitfalls possibly are, to really make sure that the carton makes it into the bin to start, and then as it makes its way through the chain, it's given the best chance possible to be able to be collected, sent to the right place to be processed, where the fiber can be yielded and the residuals can be recycled. So in summary, carton recycling is happening. It's real. We're seeing it happen. We're seeing it grow. It's not done yet, and it's not perfect. I will not be the one to tell you that we finished our job by a long shot. I still think we have a bunch of work to go, but I think we've made great strides, and we'll continue to do so. Cartons are in demand. You have existing infrastructure that's taking cartons, and you also have people who are asking about it. We get a number of calls each month with people considering the possibility of using cartons as part of their system. Some are traditional paper mills, some are companies that are looking at it as sort of a non-traditional solution. So it continues. This is one of those commodities in the chain is mills have to dig deeper into the chain where you have an opportunity to have value both on the fiber that exists inside the poly and polyaluminum and then for the polyaluminum as well. So markets do exist, both domestically and export. We need to fill the pipeline, so we need more. I mean, we need to make sure that this work we're doing continues and goes on. So if you're not yet accepting cartons, we'd love to talk to you to be able to grow that and create more available cartons out there for recycling. And finally, again, we believe that as access grows and the ability to put unqualified logos onto the cartons grows, that the visibility of carton recycling will grow, and we believe the performance will also improve for carton recycling. And I believe that was my last slide. Other than this is just, we have two websites at Carton Council. One is recyclecartons.com, one is cartonopportunities.org. I'll tell you that recyclecartons.com is the original one. It's a great site. It'll give you some basic information. And what else is cool with recyclecartons.com is if your community has carton recycling, and we know that it does, a person can go into that website, pull up either by name of community or zip code, and they will be able to see if they have recycling for cartons. If they don't, it'll let them know. And then it actually has a ability for someone to notify us at Carton Council that they'd like to pursue it. And finally, Carton Opportunities is a little bit more of a professional site. More recycling professionals, I think, can get more information from it. Plus, there are some toolkits and there's some help guides online as well at that site, which really can become a resource. And Wayne, I think that's all for me.
Okay, great, Jason. That was an excellent presentation. So we're now going to take some question and answer session right now. And if you do have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box. We do have some questions already, so I'll pose them to Jason. This person lives in Oregon and they have several mills in the northwest of the country. Can you explain what technological barriers have prevented them from accepting this material as compared to other parts of the country? Is the Carton Council able to help pay for retrofits or whatever improvements are necessary?
So I can't speak specifically for each mill because I don't know what each mill situation is, but I guess in order for a mill to be able to handle cartons, they've got to be able to handle depolying of a package. And so not knowing what the various mills are or what they do, I can only assume that if they can't use them, it's because they don't have the ability to handle they don't have the ability to handle a poly-coated product. Secondly, it could also depend on what the mill is making. You know, if the mill is making newsprint, I don't believe cartons would be the best option for newsprint. I think the fiber is better used in some other products. With regards to help, yes, we're more than willing to help. You know, I don't look at it just as do we just have money to give out. I think it's really a sit down and discussion with the mill to understand, A, are they interested? B, if they are interested, what's needed to be done? Because I think we bring more to the table than just money. You know, there's also a lot of resources. My company, Tetra Pak, and for example, Evergreen, you know, we make these products. We have experts within who can talk with some of these mills, and in fact, they've done it in the past, to really identify there may be a simple solution. So my answer to that second piece would be, we're always willing to talk to a mill that might be interested in working on cartons, and all they need to do is contact us, and many have, and we continue to have conversations with folks like that on a regular basis.
Just to follow up, Jason, I'm just curious, is there a processing technology that can be used as an interim step? You know, I'm thinking of like plastics have interim processors. Is there technology that could handle the material before it gets to the mill?
You know, Wayne, it depends. I mean, some people have thought about having a location that could potentially shred cartons, so you'd have a central shredding location. The belief that some people have is that if you shredded the cartons, it would allow for more access for water to get into the fiber and therefore pulp it up a little bit quicker. But it still doesn't necessarily solve the piece on being able to handle the poly, because even if you did that, you'd still have poly coming off in the pulping process. And if your pulping process can't handle the poly, it's still not necessarily, I don't know that an interim would work.
Okay.
But listen, again, I guess I want to be clear. Because globally we've seen all kinds of different stuff. If people have ideas, we'd love to hear it, because I can pull from a resource that's not just limited to the U.S., but limited to the globe. So, you know, if people have thoughts, you know, there's a chain of folks I can run it by to see if it's ever been done or tried.
Okay, this question is concerning wallboard. Is it necessary to add fire chemical retardants to make the material acceptable under building codes? And if so, what types of retardants are used or acceptable?
So I can't answer that completely, because that would be better answered by the folks who are working on it. If you look, I put one of the companies who's working on cartons for wallboard is called Rewall, and I think I'm trying to think of what their website is. But if you go to the website for and it's either Rewall Products or Rewall Industries, if you go to the website, I think you can get that information. I do believe that there is fire retardant in it, but I don't want to speak out of turn, because I for sure don't know what they use, and I want to make sure that I'm not misleading anybody. But I do know that they are competing against things like OSB and other stuff in the building industry. So I have to believe that they've got the same requirements. But what the stuff is and what the chemicals are, I just don't know.
Okay. This question has to do with the plastic lids and caps on the poly-coated containers. Are there markets for these materials, or is that an issue with the contamination percentage?
There is. So there are markets, and basically, I'll tell you, in the U.S. right now, with the mills who are taking, we are working still with them to develop homes for that residual. They're all taking the fiber out. The residual, some are doing some recycling with it, some of it's not being recycled yet. But once the system is set, yes, what would typically happen, and I can pull from my experience outside of the U.S., what typically happens is the material all goes to a facility that will separate the LDPE, the part that covers the body, from the caps and things like that. And then the one will go on to be recycled in one way, the caps will go on to another. So in the end, when I talk about it all being recycled, I talk about both the caps and the sleeves being taken care of.
Okay. This question is requesting data, if available, for cartons collected in New York City or other major cities. And the second part is in New York City schools and other major school systems.
We can get that. In fact, if that person would just, I don't have it offhand, but we can get specific information for people if they are looking for it. It would just need to, they could email me, or they could email, I think on the webinar there was a number to call, but I think there is a way to get that information where we can give them some more information. But we are working very much with New York City schools and New York schools, and we do have good collection happening in the city. In fact, if you remember the picture that showed the bales, that was from the Sims facility in Brooklyn, which brings in the cartons from New York City.
Okay, speaking of bales, how much does an average bale weigh, and what are the dimensions?
Well, the dimensions will depend on the baler, as would the weight of the bale. But typically, the way cartons bale up, it's not a whole lot different than cardboard. You know, you could have a bale weigh 1,500 pounds, 1,600 pounds, 1,400 pounds. It really depends on the piece of equipment that the sorting facility has. And that really is going to vary from place to place.
Where can someone apply for the school bin grant?
The school bin grant, again, go to Carton Opportunities and go to cartonopportunities.org. Otherwise, can I just give you guys my email address, and I'm happy if you guys send them to me. I'll forward them to the right people.
Okay.
So, Wayne, do you want me to say it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, it's jason.pelz@tetrapak.com. And I will, for some of these, because I don't have all the emails in front of me and I can't look it up, I will make sure that I reply and I copy the right person within Carton Council as to who can help.
And also, Jason, you'll get a report of the webinar, and it does list the questions that we're asking you today, so you can follow up with that particular contact.
Oh, okay, excellent, perfect.
You might have covered this in one of the slides. Is there a percentage of the carton recovery domestic versus overseas?
So you're talking about percent, like what the recycling rate is?
Yeah, what of the overall recovery? What percentage is staying in the U.S. and how much is going overseas?
Oh, okay. So I would say right now from the U.S., I would guess that probably 70% of the material is going overseas and 30% is staying in the U.S. And a lot of that, if you take a look at that slide I had showed, you know, there's a big portion of the country where there isn't yet a mill that we would like to see. Also, from a market standpoint, you know, the export market is good. And like many of the other recyclables, OCC, newspaper, things like that, the demand and the proper technology happens to lie in a foreign country. So, you know, again, we view cartons as no different than any other recyclable. And if that right technology and right home lives across an ocean, we're okay with it because we want to make sure that it goes to the right place and the right stuff is done with it, and we're confident with those markets where it goes.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions here. Are cartons the most green, quote-unquote, food packaging solution? And just to follow up, I believe one of your slides mentioned the sustainability of cartons. Is there a life cycle assessment available that you base that information on?
Life cycle wise, we have a number of them because we've done it against a number of products. If there's a general one, I'll have to check. But based on numerous life cycle analysis against various packaging formats, that's where the comment comes from. Say the first part of the question again.
I'm sorry, I went on to another question here.
No.
Is it the most green food packaging solution?
You know what? I couldn't answer that because I don't know. And here's the problem with asking that is compared to what?
Right.
I don't know what you're comparing it to. So really, I can't answer it because there could be something out there that we're not aware of, or there could be a special situation where we might not be. So I honestly can't answer that way.
Okay. And this question wonders why the Chinese and South Pacific countries have invested more in carton recycling in terms of mill market development versus USA.
Well, I'll tell you, the truth is the Chinese, if you look at that thing, it was really the Koreans. It wasn't China, and there's a difference in that. The Koreans have been poly consumers for a long, long time. They've been buying it for years. So they've invested and they've spent the money, and they looked at that as a way to get the material. Why it's happened in other countries, I think it's just been, they're just ahead. I mean, I don't think we had the material, in the sense that, or let me rephrase that, it wasn't in the recycling stream, so maybe it wasn't looked at sooner on. So they've got a head start on us. In the case of the U.S., I think you've got more interest now, but I think it's something that companies have to balance. If you were a big paper mill here in the U.S., would you really want to make the investments for potentially a very small amount of volume? In some of the other countries, Wayne, the mills that are taking this are generally smaller relatively compared to here. So maybe they're a little bit more nimble, or to them, because they're smaller, cartons make up a bigger proportion of what they're going to run. So I think it's a number of different reasons. I don't think it's for lack of want. I think it's just a question of really priorities. Does it pay to do this or invest in something else at the mill? And what I'm seeing is more mills are getting interested, and therefore I think priority-wise people are looking at it, and you could see some additional investments or additional capacity to handle cartons coming here. But it could be a number of things.
Okay. Do you have any data on the current recycling rate for aseptic packaging?
Well, for cartons as a whole, we conservatively think it's somewhere around 10.5 to 11% for cartons right now. And the reason I say conservatively is because we don't believe we have all the information. We do have information from the folks that we work with, but we don't work with everybody, when it comes to cartons. And as many people know, when it comes to waste paper, it's not always that easy to get all the information you need. So when you talk about cartons, and again, I'm talking about them as a whole in the U.S. because aseptic and gable top go together. Again, 10.5 to 11%.
Mm-hmm. Are there any MRFs in New Jersey that take cartons?
There are. So you're putting me, yes, I'm just trying to think offhand without having a list in front of me. The waste management MRF at the port, or I think it's called St. Charles Street now, that one takes cartons. There are others as well, but honestly, Wayne, I didn't even think about having that information offhand. So to answer that question, again, if someone sends me the email, I can give a reply back pretty quick.
Okay, and one more time, could you give your email address out?
You bet. Jason, Jason, .pelz at tetrapak.com.
Okay, great. That's it for the questions. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to pose them offline. And so we're going to wrap up here. And again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, have been recorded and will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and the Recycling Market Center websites. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you'll join us for next month's webinar, and please visit the NRC or RMC websites for scheduling updates. Thank you, Jason, and thank you for the audience for participating, and we'll see you next time. And have a happy holidays.
Thank you.